Well, so everybody,
All right.
hello and welcome back, you two. We've
Hello.
got, I have, as you might imagine from my little announcement, I have quite an
I
array of
think that was
various
her.
classics, among
Yeah, fine.
others. Um, with this and
Hmm.
my much beloved and much battered copy of In the Labyrinth, which is a very low rent production value by today's standards, but at the time was considered fancy with its glossiness, and
Hmm.
which is no longer glossy. I took these things camping, multiple
Uh,
times. You can
Mm.
see the abuse they've suffered through hours of play and perusal. Um, Inside them are still notes, characters, an unused sheet of hex paper, which is a little unusual because I have lots of
wow.
used sheets. Uh, the character sheets for my various hacks of the game over the years. Um, so anyway, though, that's probably my, if you were to say which one of those games is your game, I would say In the Labyrinth.
Mm.
I don't know if you're that familiar with its history. That's actually the derived game.
Uh,
The originals
Yeah,
were two tiny little micro games, Melee and Wizard,
yeah.
which I
I
have,
got
and
I got
yeah,
yeah, I
the
remember hearing about them. I never.
yeah,
yeah,
and
the ones and in the labyrinth and stuff.
the lot of the interesting things about these games is how many quick incarnations that they had.
Hmm.
That's sort of insight number one. How many are you familiar with? I mean, any of the immediate history of some of the titles that I threw up there? Um,
Yeah, I think
Not,
I have own most a bunch of them, and I've played Dragon Quest, Tunnels and Trolls, RuneQuest back in the day.
let's take those
The others
three.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's take those three.
Hmm.
And I'm really glad that you played Dragon Quest because I have questions for you.
It's ages since I touched it, but
Oh
it's
well, um, the uh, the first thing though, the point I wanted to
hmm
make was that none of these is a single text, or very few of them. Just like I was saying for In the Labyrinth, they began as independent publications or as publications within the
hmm
microgaming series, um, and from the company Metagaming, and
they all
then
did.
Melee and Wizard, right? And then what I'm saying though is that they each had the fantasy trip written on them, which implied that there was something called the fantasy trip. And then later, the fantasy trip appears as In the Labyrinth, including Advanced Melee and Advanced Wizard. What I'm saying is that you had a series of publications, in this case confined within a single company, but the the rest are very similar. Dragon Quest first came out in a series of separate small volumes, which I've never seen. And then the 1980-ish, I'll have to look it up, 80-ish or 81 publication, this one, is
Oh,
actually those booklets stuck together.
oh, you got the one book version.
Right.
Yeah,
And you
I
have the
got
early?
I have the book the box with
Right.
Yeah,
separate I think three
I
booklets or
had the
something
Right.
like that.
box when I was in high school. I think I've never played
Excellent.
it.
So yeah, you're exactly right. This is the publication that came out after that when they stuck them all
Yeah.
together. And a lot of them are that way. Eastgarth is the same way. It came out in a series. Actually, it's been through multiple publications,
Hmm.
and the first one, which I had in the image, was the first booklet, and then there was a whole bunch of other little booklets. I mean, we're all familiar with that format. It's the same format as the TSR
Hmm.
pamphlets, the little supplements and the actual booklets inside the D&D box. And
Yeah.
the
And
and the
probably
micro games were pretty similar. They were a
yeah.
little smaller, but they were pretty similar.
And
Now,
probably also Travelers little black
right,
books.
right. And so these little booklets then later either they make a bigger game with a huge rewrite and make it a new thing, like in the Labyrinth, or they stick all the booklets together and ram them into a book so that my version of where did you go? Ah, yes. My version of Iskarth, which is actually as a book, is quite a slim volume. But the reason it's slim is because they slammed all the booklets together in itsy bitsy teeny weeny eye strain o vision death type. So yeah, the idea that a book, it's fascinating. Back in 1980, nobody would want to carry a role-playing game if it was heavens too big. Right. I know. But it is worth pointing out that these things are being published, in these little bits, and then they get stacked together and then sometimes rewritten. And RuneQuest, they kind of kept up through what they call second edition. I think that actually encompasses 3 different slightly altered printings of that same cover image, with different appendices and stuff as you go along. So really, we're not really working with pristine original texts in each case, right? Each one is kind of a sort of, even Traveler, it came in, has different booklets, but it came all together in a box.
Yeah.
Right. So, but still, it then had a bunch of supplements that were in that same format, I believe. Right.
Yes.
That quickly followed.
And adventures in the same formats.
Yeah, and I got confused about like which ones were in the core box and which one weren't, and I made the mistake sometime in an online discussion of referring to one of the supplements as if it was in the core text, and the guy got all bent out of shape, and anyway, so I may be not entirely scholarly in referring to what is in like the original Iskarth or the original this or that, because I'm just working with the version that came to me either at the time or that I decided to pick up later, and it was sort of the representative version of the early phase that I could find. So I figure it's kind of the same for all of us, unless one of you is secretly a PhD in early RPG design.
Nope. I have quite a collection, but I'm certainly no PhD.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look. All of us are passing familiar with them, and therefore this can be a pretty interesting conversation of compared knowledge. One thing we could do, which is sort of an amusing idea, is to quickly, or relatively quickly, try some character creation. And I don't know, Rod, do you have any of these these games kicking around, or not?
I've got a PDF of Dragon Quest on my computer, and I confess I spoiled my title making a Dragon Quest character last week.
Well, you did. Well, good. Hang on. Yeah. You know what? Let's all do Dragon Quest. All right. Excellent. Okay. Especially because we have Herman here, and this is the game I had questions about, for God's sake. And I'll give it away. After I proceeded a few steps, I had literally no idea whatsoever about how to go on. There was no way.
Was it specifically in relation to making a wizard type character?
Actually, it was making anybody. I did want to make anybody. A wizard. Yeah, I wanted to make a wizard as it happened. Because when you have a magic section that like instantly jumps into describing all the dukes of hell,
right?
You're kind of going, well, I think I know where I'm going with this, but the like I said, I stalled out just before that point. And Rod, you said you were working on such a character, on a character, right?
Yeah, I made up a character.
Awesome. And, well, let's take a look. I have the sequence here, because I happily made a bunch of new characters. Look at that. You're going to scan that and send it is what you're going to do. It's going to get attached.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Fantastic. Well, let's take it through. I'm going to tell you what the book told me, and Herman double check us on this. The first thing it told me to do was to roll 4d5, which back in 1980-ish did not exist.
Wait a minute.
Probably was a die 20 numbered 1 to 10 twice. And
right. Well, what they exactly, because they didn't really have d10s either.
No.
So, but everyone thought of it as d10 because you didn't have 11 through 20 on the die.
Yep.
So you rolled those, and we're supposed to cut them in half, 4 of them.
I may have already done my character wrong because I don't not remember that.
No? Do you remember how you
Unless
generated your numbers?
Wait, was I using the TSR document? I've got the PDF open right now. I'm gonna just scroll to this character creation section for a moment. Did I
remember if I can recall where the books are? So
description of characteristics
in the basement somewhere, Herman?
Yeah, somewhere in the huge stack of.
Yeah. Whatever version I have, what is this? Bantam? It says each player rolls 2d10 and reads across the line on the point generation table.
Oh, there you go. All right.
So I think I have a different.
No, that's okay though. That's exactly what we're talking about though.
That also sounds so sort of familiar, but
yeah,
that's
because my 4d5 method also doesn't give me points. It gives me a place to go on that table, and then I read across
the table and
discover my point total and my maximum value.
Yeah,
right.
So, and I'm pretty sure it's the same table, but there's a little clue right there that we actually you can drag up slightly different versions from the early texts. So
this is Bantam 1982, by the way.
Okay, this one is SPI. The original publisher, second edition, which means by second edition they mean they stuck them together.
Right.
So, I ended up, I don't know about you, but I ended up with 89 points D, which is a fancy way of saying that my maximum value for any one was 22. And so there's 5 values that I'm going to distribute my points across. There's a complicated set of rules about how many you can have at max, which is 1, and then how many you could have at 1 under max, and then how many you can have at 2 under max, and then there's options within that. And after a little while, your head bleeds, and then you just allocate your points and move on.
Yeah,
and
I think that sounds. Did I? Okay, I didn't read a lot of this.
No, I don't really blame you. It was, and I decided to suffer just because all of a sudden I understood it after the second time, and I was like, just right when I was going to say, okay, forget this, and I was like, oh wait, I get it. But
I think my character is legal because I went up to the max value, and I think that obviates a lot of these other.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Codicils.
Yeah. So exactly. So we've got it. It's actually, you can see, the different. You can see that this is actually a really, really super different set of characteristics than the Dungeons and Dragons ones. Physical strength, manual dexterity, agility, endurance, and magic aptitude. And all of those scores are used in play. I mean, Rod.
My version has an additional score, willpower.
Willpower in this one, the one I have, is a derived attribute.
Interesting.
Yeah. There is willpower, but you derive it in some way.
Okay.
If I'm remembering
correctly. Does this
correctly.
say... no, I think mine is telling me this is a...
Okay.
Well, let's move on.
Yeah, but you also roll to... you can choose what gender your character is. And then but you have to roll to see whether you're left-handed or right-handed. Then you can choose to try to be non-human, and without going into the details, you have to roll for it. And this was if you want to be non-human, you have to see if you can make the percentage, if you get one of the percentages that corresponds to another non-human, you can decide to be that one instead, and you get 3 tries. I failed, sadly, to be a shape changer, which I really wanted to be. There's some interesting choices. There's dwarf, elf, and halfling, which is fine, but you also have giant, orc, and shape changer,
Right.
which is kind of interesting. The other thing that's worth that I found interesting was that being a non-human alters the worth of experience points. And although I'm used to the humans being the baseline and everybody else being slow learners, which is kind of the default for these games, orcs of all things, actually, their experience points are more valuable than humans. Apparently, orcs learn fast.
Yeah, and die young or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they only live 40 to 45 years.
Yeah, so it could be that they were looking at lifespan as an indicator for that, but I don't know. So the other interesting thing, of course, where the thing gets really interesting, is that you cast your characters kind of you roll for their aspects, their horoscope, or their birth sign, basically. I said horoscope, but it's kind of more of a zodiac. You roll as well for your rather complex social background, and whether you're legitimate, and what your birth order is. And all of a sudden you kind of realize that you're looking at a setting. You kind of realize more or less. They don't, to my knowledge, there is a canonical setting. So like there's a big map that you can look at and stuff, but it's kind of, they say actually right there in the rules, it's mostly Nordic fairy tale, but they wanted the Solomonic magic, so they kind of grafted that in there.
Yeah.
So, but it's a little odd because how medieval is it? A lot of the birth tables seem to imply more of a medieval setting than an ancient, kind of pre-medieval Nordic one. So it's a little hard to kind of grasp the setting. And especially then you've thrown in halflings. So, it's
also a fantasy setting with
we're looking at the basic assumption of, okay, fantasy has hobbits. It just does. Right. So from there I got my experience points, which you roll for. You roll for your experience points and you roll for your money. And then I stalled out. That's where I could not figure out how on earth. It says I can open one skill at rank 0, for 100 experience points. That's a character option you can take. But that's all I got. I guess I pick one skill, and the table that I found in the book seems incomplete of all the different skills I can get. So I started to get there's nothing about, and if you want to be a magic user, you do this. Stuff like that. Rod, what was it with you?
Well, I feel like I may have had to make some inferences in order to proceed. But what I thought that meant was that you just straight up go to the experience point table and start buying skills. And because a lot of the skills have a rank 0 cost that's quite high.
Right.
When you're a first level character, you can, as you said, open a skill for only 100 points.
Right. But I only have 170 total. So
yeah,
I end up being
you know what I did, Ron? I have no skills. I only have weapon skills. Because being able to throw a rock at rank 0 is only 25 points.
I see. Okay, so I should have gone there and learned how to.
Yeah, that was not
right.
That was not intuitive defined.
You're right. Because I gave no guidance for that. In that case, I probably could have just gone and got my hatchet and my shield.
Right.
Be ready to go, and that'd be okay. And then what's interesting here is very RuneQuest-y. It is through the course of play that you then build your character as a working person, as somebody
Right,
with a job or with an identity. I am a navigator. I am a wizard, and so on. And it would be
yeah.
it's
The
kind of
skills
interesting.
themselves are really interesting, I thought.
Yeah, they are, especially because
Mhm.
there's so few and each one is so nuanced. Each skill is really a whole skill set.
Yeah.
And not only is it broad to begin with, it gets better as you rank up. So it's actually, I kind of liked it. It was
Yeah,
it's like you are a navigator. You are, a this or a that. You're just not
Yeah. Yeah.
all that good at it yet, but you
right.
you are it. You have, that identity. Which I thought that was cool. So that makes a little more sense. The game is meant to be played, right? The game is meant to be
Yeah.
played. You're supposed to play, just like RuneQuest. You're supposed to just get in there, have your adventures, and your guy will develop. And there's a lot of room for the development. You can become a really badass magician, but I don't think you
Yeah.
can start a badass magician
No,
very easily.
I think you can start with one of the broad skills.
Right,
Like I want to be a healer, I can get healer cost 1,000, but at the start I can get healer for 100,
right. And so I
Right.
and
think,
open up healer rank 0, and then I'm
yes.
the healer,
So
a
for
healer.
example, I really, you can get it. I really like Navigator.
Yeah.
I thought that was a
Right,
cool
right.
thing. I want to play a Navigator. So I could open up Navigator at at 100 points, which I got that,
Yeah.
and then have 70 points for the other few things that I
Right.
wanted
Yeah,
to kick around.
for
A
the
few
javelin
weapons.
skill,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
javelin and a, well, that's about it, or
Right.
spear thrower and
Okay. So is you've actually played, right? With
Yeah.
with a campaign and things. So is the general assumption is you'll get one like career skill and then a weapon or
you
two?
mostly either go for some somewhat bigger weapon, like I use a lance or something. But
Right.
you start with one career skill and then fill it up with something to defend yourself with.
Right. Okay. That's interesting.
And
And what
then,
if
Go ahead.
well,
and then
what can you start with magic or
I'm
that because
trying-
that's very confusing.
yeah, you needed to. Gosh, that's the
Mhm.
confusing thing was like,
Well, the rules for learning skills in terms of
Mhm.
in-game time, in-game effort, cost, and many other details are very, very careful. So it
Right.
seems as though a great deal of play would be all about what you're training in. And a great deal of your announcements
Right.
about your character have to do with the ongoing workup, the ongoing working
Right.
effort of getting yourself, trained. Then that seems like a big part of your attention to play.
Right.
You don't wait for your experience points and then just throw a few round. You have to be in
Mhm.
there thinking about it, finding
Yep.
your teacher, working with your teacher, saying, did you put your training in this week? Yes, I put in my training this week.
It sort of fits in with SPI, which was known for
Right.
their board games and careful procedures for their board games.
Right.
The
I've
combat is particularly
Yeah.
careful. I mean, it's war gamey, it's maneuver based.
Yeah.
You run around in fighting. Well, what was it like playing combat?
It was, gosh, it's really years and years ago. It was, you had to be careful. You had to plan what you were going to do, if I remember right. And it was kind of deadly at the start, if you,
Mhm.
as you usually didn't have the easy healing of RuneQuest or
Right.
D&D or things
Yeah,
like
at
that.
least RuneQuest had those 1 to 4 point healing spells that
Yeah.
everybody started packing really fast.
Yeah, you also did.
Yeah.
So you use your was it your spirit magic or your small magic?
Right. Yes. Yes. You get your battle magic gets up to
battle
armor
magic.
yourself
Battle
up a
magic
bit.
was it?
Yeah.
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 And this was more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And did y'all play it or did you play it on a hex map?
Hex map, yes. I think we used tokens instead of minis as that what we had around at the time. So
Yeah. The reason I'm going into this kind of detail with Dragon Quest is
Hmm.
for purposes of quick comparison across other things, so we're getting an idea of the variables. One of the
Yeah.
variables I want to focus on that I mentioned already was the character's placement in the world, both socially and spiritually.
Hmm.
And that's something that's big in some of the games and very vague or, hand waved or absent in the others.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't mention, I just want to get it on the, into the conversation now, is the implied situation of play at the start. Here, the game is very clear. The there
Hmm.
the GM runs adventures, period. And we've got the big map. In fact, it's very clear. You're supposed to have the big map, and then you're
Hmm.
supposed to have the location maps in it. Basically, your large scale
Yeah.
campaign map and your small scale battle maps. And you are pretty much, you dump them in one end of this adventure, and they are to play this adventure, and
Yep.
they know it. The players know it. The GM even has a fairly sophisticated set of uh I guess bullet points, for how this is to be handled properly
Hmm.
and what they're responsible for. It's very big on, if you're going to run an adventure, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for that. Does that sound familiar, Herman? That
I don't think we had it that specifically when we ran it, but
Mhm.
it was not our first game either. So
Right.
it was. I mean, we all played D&D before and things like that. So there was the understanding that, well, how you play stuff
Right.
was not necessarily exactly by, we do it by the book. We do it.
Right. Right.
I'm actually looking at section 80, the adventure sequence.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One, track weight stage, encounter stage, chase stage, tactical stage.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, there's
Very,
Yeah.
actually fairly, I don't know, rigid, but let's just say very articulated concepts of
yeah, yeah.
the adventure as such. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think that stems from SPI being a board game
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
company and board game designers who trying their hand at this new thing for them, being a role playing game.
but it's sort of an insightful point of view more than I think
Hmm.
just a default one, because that was something that was painfully lacking
Oh
in
yeah.
many other games at the time, was any notion of what the DM was supposed to do. And I actually will point that out in a couple of other games, in the texts about that.
Okay.
But keeping in mind that situation of play being in this adventure, in
Hmm.
this text I find no connection whatsoever between that and all of that interesting nuanced detail of the characters socially.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
something that I want to point at, is that there's nothing in there about your birth order that affects the adventure
Hmm.
in explicitly. The idea that in a if it didn't give any rules for running adventures, then I would
Yeah.
say whatever. But it does give rules for running the adventures. And one of the rules does not, the rule that's absent is look
Hmm.
at your character's social status. It's absent. And so there's sort of an interesting disconnect. You spend a lot of this time on this incredibly naturalistic approach toward making up your character. And like almost all of these
Hmm.
games, it's obsessed with nature nurture. God forbid you should ever be confused about how much of your percent to hit with a spear came from your
Hmm.
physiology and
Yeah.
how much of it came from your training. If you somehow didn't know which was which, then clearly, all was lost. So I mean, they're all really, almost all really big on that concept. And so here you have this careful approach toward building it, and there's something kind of exciting about building the Dragon Quest character. It's
It was fun.
yeah, I mean, it's
Hmm.
you're kind of looking at them after a little bit and going, wow, he's uh he's his aspect are the autumnal stars. He comes from the impoverished
Oh, I got
gentlefolk.
that one too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
did you?
Yeah.
And he's the third child, legitimate. And you're like, okay, I'm starting to think about it. And he's right-handed. He's a guy. He's a human. He's got these, and then you start, oh, I want to be a navigator. Okay, I'm starting to get kind of an interesting idea,
Right, right.
And right then you say, okay, so
Yeah.
what's the adventure? Now, I'm not that interested in the moment that somebody could say, well, but you could. A good DM will obviously, come on, Ron. I'm like, look, let's just leave that good DM out of it for now.
You want your game text to guide the non-good GM to become the good GM, and
I think so, but
Right.
at this point, what I'm kind of
and that
interested in is the notions of how are the games never mind what's not textual. Let's see how they're different textually,
yeah.
and you start seeing some pretty interesting things. So social, physical. Okay, so there's there's physiological placement in the world, which
Mhm.
all these games are fairly well developed for. There's social place in the world, and race plays a big role in that in these games. A
Yep.
very big deal of like your social position in the fantasy setting comes from what fantasy race you are. But a lot of them go further and put in all these social classes as well. And then you have the spiritual aspect that crops up. In RuneQuest, it's power. And if your power ability is
Mhm.
right away, it's the attention of the gods, the attention of the metaphysical world upon your character, which is more or less synonymous with the amount of power that they actually have at their disposal, um, is a primary attribute in RuneQuest. And not only that, if you want to start with magic, you get in hawk to a cult. You
Yep.
go and you get credit at a cult. So all of a sudden, you've got a religious relationship. You don't have to be, hugely committed to that cult otherwise, but you owe
Mhm.
them. And if you read Cults of Prax or whatever, it's going to be pretty quick that you're going to be declaring yourself a layman of something.
Yep.
And so Glorantha is kind of notable, I think, or well recognized for having starting characters basically be, for lack of a better word, religious, or at least
Mhm.
embedded in the observances and belief structures of their culture.
Yep.
Which then, as soon as you start thinking, you start getting ethnic about it too. Well, I'm from Prax. Well, I'm from Tarsh, or whatever. But the I'm saying RuneQuest isn't alone. It's sort of the emblematic game of the time
Mhm.
for doing that, but it's certainly not alone. Dragon Quest doesn't go that far. You don't end up, they don't have like a cultural religion or something that you buy into. You don't have a town you come from or something like that.
No,
But
it
you
doesn't.
it doesn't go that far, but it points there. There's, you say, "Oh, I'm, autumnal stars aspect," which means I get like a bonus at this time of year and a penalty at that time of year and things like that. If we take a look at some of the others, probably the one of the strongest contrasts to that is the fantasy trip. And the fantasy trip takes a really different approach because most of the others, Iskarth, Petal Throne, certainly things like Bushido,
Mhm.
all of them have this incredibly evocative setting. And people say all these games, their setting is too detailed. In the core book, it's not. The core book is evocative, and you could play with that and run with it, and you would be fine. Evocative in a very literary sense, usually. So yes, there's a high bar. There's a high bar to getting into Tecumel, even at the level of the core book. There's a high bar to getting into Glorantha. There's a high bar to getting into the fantasy medieval Japan of Bushido. There's you got to be
Mhm.
a reader. You got to be a person who's going to absorb this, internalize it, turn it over in your mind, and start getting ideas. Um, all of those are very distinctive from Dungeons and Dragons, especially of that time, which
Yep.
was characterized either by the few people who had access to the original box set and people who had access to Holmes 1977. If you had those, I consider the latter very playable. But one thing it's not is setting-ish. It's kind of not. And it also occurs to me neither is Tunnels and Trolls. Tunnels and Trolls and pretty much enjoys the fact that there's no setting. I mean, it kind of makes a wonderful, yeah, you can play a fairy, you can play a leprechaun, you can play a dwarf, and you get these bonuses and throw them all in there, have a good time. And it's almost a kaleidoscopic, romp.
I think the version I have has sort of like a world map. That's it.
The notion that your character would have, a cultural ideology.
Yep.
I mean, why?
Yeah.
Why are you going to interfere with the fun, man? Get in there. And of course, and I think it's really the only one that takes a genuinely snarky, semi-offensive approach toward its core content. It's the only one that just goes bonkers with, the infamous spell names are of course part of this. But do you remember that, Rod? No.
Yeah, I remember well because I just happened to find Tunnels and Trolls in an old hobby shop.
Oh, right.
In the 2000s, and I was flipping through, and I was like, "What did I just read?"
Yeah, exactly. The other one I mentioned was In the Labyrinth. Okay, so the In the Labyrinth, unlike Tunnels and Trolls, nods towards setting. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Sidri. And Sidri is this enormous planet, just phenomenal. Maybe it's not even a planet, but it's a realm, and it's enormous. Maybe it is a planet. And the Minoran, the Ancients, grabbed anybody they liked from wherever and threw them onto Sidri, and that's where they've been ever since.
I think they recycled that for GURPS Fantasy, did they? Yeah, okay.
Oh wait, for GURPS fan, I thought you were saying recycled it from science fiction background, and yeah, that was a big thing at the time. No. But
right.
For GURPS Fantasy, they might have, and they could do that because GURPS is by Steve Jackson for Steve Jackson Games. In the Labyrinth was Steve Jackson for metagaming, and then there was a heinous legal battle that Jackson lost. So he had to start all over with GURPS. And so it's not surprising that a great deal of Fantasy Trip bits and pieces are in GURPS Fantasy in particular.
Sindri.
Didn't he recently get a rights back?
He did fairly recently, I think.
Yeah, actually. I think so.
Yeah, quite recently. It's in parallel with Jack Herman and Jeff D getting Villains and Vigilantes back after all these years. So that's been showing up lately. Yeah.
Well, maybe not GURPS Fantasy. I don't know. I recognize the setting concept. I think it showed up in some GURPS product, but
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And and if it did, then the pedigree in terms of authorship is legit. Yeah. Clearly, and they're upfront about it. There's like, we're not really trying to make sense here. We just want to let everything be there. We just want to let them all be there. And they actually have some playful referencing, such as giving orcs the genus name Pithecanthropus. And they kind of throw in some, I would say, Niven-esque justifications here and there just for the hell of it, without really needing for it to matter too much. But the whole point of Sidri is that you can basically make your local portion whatever fantasy realm you want. So it's almost GURPSy in fantasy terms already. Furthermore, most of their setting-ish content, like Tunnels and Trolls, kind of borders on jokes. They've got, first of all, they've got your elf, dwarf, halfling, so on. You can play orcs, and one of the most amusing things that I thought was hilarious, it goes all the way back to Melee, actually. Do you know how you make an orc character?
I'm
Make a
trying to
human one.
remember, but
You just make a human character and call it an orc, and that's it.
oh, yeah.
All the others have adjustments, like an elf has
Mhm.
this and a hobbit has that, et cetera, et cetera. But no, you want an orc, just make a guy. Which, again, I think is kind of hilarious. But the there's a few others. They threw in a race called Prootwaddles, who are kind of offensive in they're basically described in terms that we would call today mentally, or sorry, called developmentally delayed, although
Mm.
back then they used a different word. And so there's so exactly what they're thinking, I don't know, but that kind of thing shows up. But in the fantasy trip, this is the big standout. You guys are probably familiar with this. I mean, it's the backbone of GURPS, but it's an earlier form that's remarkably cleanly. GURPS is much more derived with a lot of this many points for that many points. This is real clear. You got strength, you got dexterity, you got intelligence, and you divide up your points, and then you trot over to the weapons, and each weapon has a strength minimum. And then each armor has a dexterity subtractor. So you kind of get weapons you can hold and armor that you decide you can afford to take the hit in terms of your ability to hit, trading off protection for your
Yep.
dexterity. And then you have intelligence, and intelligence sets the levels for which talents, they call them, their skills and attributes and all kinds of things,
Mhm.
which talents and which spells you can get, because they're rated at intelligence this, intelligence that, next intelligence. Also, how many points they cost, and you have as many points as your intelligence. So in spells, that's where wizards are different. For wizards, spells cost 1, everything else is doubled. For non-wizards, the listed costs for the talents are as written, and the spells cost 3 each. So they sort of are trying to give you your skilled wizard and your spellish rogue, to kind of like mix and match them if you want. Doesn't work very well, frankly. But anyway, they do all this. And that's, what? You're enjoined to give the character a personality. And their example is, for example, that your character likes animals and so gets mad if the other party members hurt an animal. And that's a personality. And a name. And you go. There you go. You go. There's not a whole lot else in terms of anything. There's no cultural grounding. There's no background.
Yep.
There's a little couple of the talents. Now, what's interesting is that the way you build your character is very stylish. They don't give you enough points. You really need 36 instead of 32. But if you start with 36, you can get your sneering duelist. You can get your stern samurai. You can get your wizard, with the mysterious staff and a gleam in their eye, your sexy wizardress if you want. You can get your priest with one really well chosen spell, that nobody knows he has. You can do that. I mean, it's you get a pretty colorful dude or dudette with your 30 if you put in 36 points. Then the problem is that the damn thing doesn't, again, completely against type for most of these other games, it doesn't scale well in terms of experience at all. Because 5 more points into it, you've blown your character concept completely. I mean, your point, in order for your points to keep you alive, you're carefully chosen which is higher, my dexterity or my intelligence, all carefully chosen. It's gone. And it's just quite it's really a shame. I mean, there's a sweet spot at 36 to 38 points, and after that it makes no sense, and before that it's unplayable. And you're kind of like, I played a lot of it, and it was really frustrating. There was just that little bit when the character was quite colorful, very characteristic. What they were good at, what they were bad at, made a ton of sense. And the game was not built for you to keep improving. Um, but and yes, I didn't find this in Dragon Quest, and I was interested not to find it, but it is present in spades in Petal Throne, in the Labyrinth, and I think in a couple of the others. Your character's livelihood, your job. How
Mhm.
much money do you make a week? Who do you work for? What are they like? How much
Yep.
do you owe? Right? What are your obligations? Of all these things, in what otherwise is a relatively superficial and color first game in the in the Labyrinth, all of a sudden you're a working stiff. Bam! I made up my priest with the gleam in his eye. Oh wait, sorry, off to work. There I go, off to my job. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that there was none of this grounding in terms of setting and culture, and then wham, there is all this grounding in terms of employment.
Yep.
And it's really like almost dizzying all of a sudden to do that. My fantasy trip character that I made up is Urga, the orc, who even at the starting character is a rather creditable highwayman,
Mm.
a rather credible one, and which is a risky job, but you make a lot of money. And there's a couple of other options that are very interesting. You can play goblins, and the goblins are these very interesting little fellows. Um, I'd always overlooked them as a kid, and now I'm looking at it and saying, "My God, we should all play goblins. This is great." So that's another nuance. You've got your kind of spiritual, magical, metaphysical placement in the world. You've got your
Mhm.
cultural and to some extent personality and status and life identity. And then you've got job. How much money do you have? How much money do you make? In many cases, how much money do you spend per unit time? So you better keep working. Got to make the rent.
Mm.
So that's another major feature. Petal Throne is a really good example of this too. And it's also kind of weird because instead of starting as natives of this remarkable culture that you've just gotten inspired about, it assumes that you're a non-native who's arrived at this one city.
Mm.
Now, again, no one says you have to do it this way, except the book says you have to do it this way. But nobody says you have to do it this way. You could, of course, just make up natives and, live there and stuff. But no, it's assumed that you showed up there. And
Mm.
it's important that you find a job. There are roles for finding the job. You can roll to see whether you own a fief that has been granted to you by the Empire, which really rocks if somebody makes that roll, because now we've got a fief. But if you don't, you're working.
Mm.
And what's kind of interesting is that the rules for the Empire are that if you make third level, now you have the social status that you can travel anywhere in the Empire. If you make fifth or sixth, can't remember which one, now you're a citizen. So it really has this. Oh, and by the way, look out. If you fall into debt, like you don't make enough from your job or you lose your job or something, then you can go into debtor's prison and might even end up a slave.
Mhm.
So just by playing through the logistics of your livelihood and whatever diversity that the characters have and this relationship your characters have with the Empire, you're kind of set up to go adventure. And it's the setting went to some effort to justify a bunch of catacombs everywhere.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the idea that you would have to go into a catacomb to go and look for something is pretty important if you're facing debtor's prison.
Mhm.
How it works if you own a fief is a different question. But the point though is that your characters are extremely grounded in their financial and cultural circumstances. The one weird thing is this business about coming from some faraway land, which, as far as I can tell, is a bit of a kludge so that the players don't have to learn very much. And it assumes that they will learn it and assimilate into it literally by becoming Empire citizens through the course of play. So it's clever, if a little strange. But in the Labyrinth, there's nothing like that. You've made up your
Yep.
character very much on the basis of fantasy vision. Like where's the brothers Hildebrandt's, picture of my character, and you can do that. And then all of a sudden, wham, you have this job in this place, and here's the wage structure of the
Yep.
job, which sort of implies like a lot more culture than than you had been allowing for so far. So anyway, it's and I notice it's kind of interesting about Dragon Quest, which really does have that grounding, and then kind of says, okay, now that you spent your silver pieces for equipping your character, that's good because we're going on an adventure.
Yep.
There you go. Never mind your job. Never mind. You're going. Here we go. So yeah. So do you see how they all parse the relationship between who and what the character is, what they're about to do, and what you establish? They all parse them a little bit differently, is
Right.
what I'm aiming at.
Mhm.
Does anyone have an example of that you had in mind of what you would do or how it works?
Yeah, I think the ones we played a little bit of Bushido back in the day, and that was really that was all culture, all
Right.
placement in the society, etc.
Right.
For whatever you were doing, if I remember it right. But all that's playing that too has been many years ago.
Right. Well, that was another little Eye Strain Vision one, wasn't it? Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't the greatest
It was sort of notorious even at the time.
Yeah.
As being the, oh my God, how many degrees do I need to even get into this? But on the other hand, looking at it, I'm a little surprised again how slim it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now I look at it and say, that doesn't seem so bad. It's not. None of these have these insane lines of splat books after all.
Right.
I mean, even RuneQuest had basically Cults of Prax, Cults of Terror. Okay, RuneQuest ended up with more, like the Big Rubble and all kinds of stuff. But still, yeah.
But the other bits were more like adventure type things, Big Rubble and
right
adventure setting type things. Was it Griffin Mountain?
Yes, Griffin Mountain was basically one great big adventure to go through.
Yep.
So, yeah. I think Chivalry and Sorcery is comparable, as I understand it, to Bushido in this regard. And I have happily grunted my way through, preparing stuff for Chivalry and Sorcery, and I really, it's one of these games where I say I am not going to do this as a game master. I just won't. And nobody ever bled my eyes like Chivalry and Sorcery. No one ever did. It is insanely painful, and at my advanced age in particular. But what's important about it, in terms of these things we're talking about, because it's the most complete, I think, for all of this. It's no fault character creation. You roll for everything. You roll your race, you roll your age, you roll your sex, you roll your weight, you roll your build. Let's see, there's a couple. It says you can choose some if you want to. You can be an elf, a dwarf, or a hobbit in medieval France.
Okay.
Right. So we move on. I will go on. I mean, then you roll your characteristic, your characteristics. They include, along with dexterity and strength, things like bardic voice. And these aren't like optional things that you buy. These are things that you roll, including your alignment, which you roll. Yeah, like I say, no fault character creation, man. You're like, oh, here he is, man. George the Dick. I'm playing him. That's what I got. And so there's the derived factors are not surprising with a game that is intended to be a battlefield campaign at the same time as an individual role-playing experience. It's not surprising your character has like a military combat factor and a command ability and stuff like that. These are all derived, and they're like better if you are of a certain social class, and then they're dropped if you're not, and stuff like that. So, already they're thinking, okay, you could well be in a battle or even leading a battle. So here's what you're going to need for that. You cast a horoscope using the magic rules, and it is a big deal. You roll a social class, which gives you your influence score and gives you your job. And of course, in the itsy bitsy, eeny weeny, teeny tiny percentages, you could be like the brother to the king. But it's pretty much likely, like me, that you're going to end up being kind of a basic, dude, maybe of the gentleborn, so you can be a knight, or if not, then you're in one of the guilds. And each one of these explodes into a variety of options and subroutines. And again, most of them at random. The feudal nation and the fief in question need to be generated and understood as part of prep. So pretty soon you're going to know what kind of financial situation this whole fief is in. Then things get a little bit tricky because it's kind of a given that there's going to be going into dungeons. And they kind of, the stitches of that part onto the game are real big. You're kind of, whoa. And now it says something like I'd have to find the phrasing, but it's something along the lines of, well, since there's going to be dungeons, or should you put dungeons in, and then there's a lot of very tortuous kind of ways for that to happen. And frankly, looking at it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I want to get back to the battle. Our duke is the bastard son of so and so, and like there's a thing, and it's not very story oriented in this regard, but there's enough to work with to get there. And you're kind of like, well, no, I'm a knight with this guy. I want to go and see what happens. So the magic is just unbelievably nuanced. I mean, they got demon summoning rules. I mean, I thought Dragon Quest had demon summoning rules. No, these guys, it's you got your ceremonies and you got your this and your that. I mean, it's really, somebody cared a lot. So the idea of playing a game where the circumstances of the fief and there's going to be a war if there isn't one already, because we got to have our battles, and to have one of the characters at least being a ceremonialist is phenomenally tempting. I mean, yeah, I mean you're ready to go. You're kind of like, and even if somebody's playing a scullion, that could be a good thing. Scullions get around.
Is there a assumption that all the characters, like that the political life of this fief is the thing that sort of glues the characters? It really
doesn't. Now, I could maybe have missed it in all of the eye bleeding, but I don't think it ever quite spits that out.
Okay.
I think that's one of those baseline ideas, that the overall sweep of the epic campaign and the fate of the fief is the context in which the adventures, the main character's possibility of getting killed today comes up. Or whatever thing that they decide. The wizard says, the maybe, I don't know, I'm making this up because this is not an example, but the wizard says, we really ought to go over to that haunted forest because I'm pretty sure that the legends there are what we're looking for. And by the way, that scullion maid who keeps giving me really, really good advice, I don't care what anybody says. She's coming. That's kind of I could be kind of wrong in my understanding of how it's supposed to go, but that seems what I just said seems pretty doable given what they give you. So and all the better if somebody's a highborn,
Yep.
in line for the local seat, kind of character, or married, a woman married to that guy or something like that. It seems pretty well suited for that. And the notion that you're playing cross class, social class,
Right.
is no small thing. It's no small thing at all. It's there in RuneQuest. It's there in Dragon Quest by people rolling differently on, the birth tables and stuff. But here, the context for that to matter in this one spot that's why I want to play. You look at it and you go, wow, that's there. It's not there. And contrasting that, I mean, this is pretty much the far end of this spectrum. Way over on the other end, you've got Tunnels and Trolls. And not too far away from that end, you've got In the Labyrinth. Yep. And to say that these are the same game in this imaginative sense they're not. I don't care if you fought a dragon in each one. It's not the same thing.
I was hoping you'd trot out high fantasy.
Oh yes, I have. That's one of the ones. And I have it right here. I encountered this actually in the mid 80s. So a piece after its publication. It also began as a bunch of booklets in 1978. And the version I have is, I think, 1981, which is booklets mashed together. One day I was excited to find a bunch of booklets for high fantasy, and I picked up a couple and discovered they were already in my book. They did, however, have quite an extensive thing. There is a campaign called Goldchester, which was run exactly as we're describing, as the epic campaign with battlefields and war games. And then they played the characters, then they dove into the characters to play them. And so the Goldchester campaign is a whole book, and there are a bunch. This game was obviously played. There are a bunch of adventures, many of which were collected into a book I have called Adventures in High Fantasy. And then those are 4 pretty extensive, you would think of them as a level up, amount of material. They're not small. I've mentioned this in a recent discussion. The solo adventure here is really sophisticated and far different. You see, this is schizophrenic. And it makes me really wonder about the history of the game in play. The game itself doesn't have a really dedicated setting. So it's not taught through the setting. The character creation is colorful enough, a lot like a couple of the others, that you kind of get a setting by making up a character. You're looking at the character and you're saying, I'm getting kind of a pretty good idea.
Did that one have horoscopes as part of the?
In high fantasy, no. In fact, I'm going to walk you through it right now. All right.
Okay.
This is the guy. First of all, everybody gets basic offense 100 and basic defense 30. There's no rolling for that. Everybody's got a set. Not bad, right? Then you've got a die roll for your innate ability. Innate ability isn't all that important if you're just a fighting person and you pick a subclass, which is also not particularly fancy. So it's kind of your indicator right there of whether you should go for playing a magic-y or, kind of fancy character. So you have several classes. They are wizard, fighter, not thief, and not healer. Hold on to your hats for those. Animal Master is one of them. And I chose Animal Master. Then I rolled my strength and my coordination. I rolled my quickness. I got something called innate quickness that way. I rolled for how much money I have. And I was able to buy a few things. Now, what's kind of interesting is that everybody picks a subclass, and the subclasses are no small thing. They've got each one that you were like looking at your fighter going, well, he's kind of boring, man. You know, the fighter class description.
Mm-hmm.
Even the wizard, you're kind of a little bored. And then you look at the subclasses and you say, aha, here is where I make my guy or gal. This is where. Because the martial art rules are awesome. You get to pick whether you use tiger style or dragon style or snake style or falcon or hawk style or whatever it is, and you and each one gets a cool weapon. I mean, if you do dragon style, you get a spear, a short spear that ignites at one end. Just by picking, like, I'm a martial artist and she uses dragon style, you get fucking rock, right? And they're all kind of like that. Well, that's one of the most colorful. Granted, the healer, subclass, you're just really good at healing people. But the hunter has all kinds of different things they can do. Most of them, yeah, most of the sensitive, the psychic, right? You can be a psychic guy. So all of a sudden, your character's like really looking pretty rad, and the system then also takes you through a bunch of different talents like acrobatics, climbing, diplomacy, nautical stuff, how well you run, all these things, and everybody does them. The role is interesting because the role on each one tells you your background in it, which sort of gives you the extent of which you know it, but your ability in it is the average of that role with the relevant attribute. So if you roll low on, so like my character, who's an animal master, I rolled that his sight was 04. I rolled a 4 on a percentage roll for his sight. And I was like, shit. And then I looked at the talents in question, and they ended up actually not being so bad. So he sees for shit, but when it comes to using that particular talent, he's better at it.
Right.
So, it's kind of an interesting way of, again, though, it's that obsession with nature nurture, that we really don't want. Just because you're good at something, you're not going to be really good at it unless you get the training. And just because you got all this training at it, can't be really good at it unless you have the requisite, talent, inborn ability. It's really important to these people. So, and you'll notice, by the way, in the fantasy trip, they didn't give a shit. Because, I mean, yes, you needed that talent, that skill to do the thing, but once you have the thing, you use your strength for the governing role and you're done. You don't have to worry about like how good and how good. But anyway, so you end up with this. You pick 3 things that you're always working on, and you can trade those out later. And those are the things that you know what, this is really cool. You train yourself. I mean, you're in training for 3 of the things. You roll a d20, and that's how your bonus for using those all the time, because you're working on them. You're better at them right now, not later. So and I rolled pretty well, and of course I said training in sight. So you know what? I don't see that well, but I'm working on it, and the things that are my talents that are with it, not so bad. And that bonus isn't halved. It's not figured into the average. It's an actual bonus. So you're like, all of a sudden, my nearsighted animal master, I get it. It took a little effort to kind of suffer through all the rolls to get there. But at that point, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of liking it. He's going to get some glasses. I'm going to look around for some glasses in this adventure. I'm going to go find like the lens grinder when I make some money, and I'm going to get some glasses. It's going to be kind of fun. So, the subclass I chose, I decided to be kind of, obvious, and made him a hunter as well as an animal master. So the animal master can train and can trap animals. The hunter is really good roaming around and not getting surprised and seeing better in the dark and stuff like that. So so overall though, that was pretty much it. There is no culture except that implied by the fact that you've got cool martial arts with cool animal names. There's no map. Well, obviously when they played they used a map. They were playing Goldchester, at least at some point. So there's sort of an implication that there must be one, but they tell you start with a 20-room dungeon. Work out from there. Don't worry about anything else. Make your dungeon, stock it, play, have them leave the dungeon, do a thing, think a little, and then it just says, just keep going, which is actually pretty good advice.
Yeah.
I was a little surprised. I was like, that is not the Dungeons and Dragons model or the very refined and almost distilled Dungeons and Dragons model of Tunnels and Trolls. Or the kind of hand wavy, oh, make it work, we're here for other reasons, kind of in the labyrinth thing.
Yep.
Nor is it all the others, which are, this is the fantasy world and it will rock your boat, which they all do. Did I mention that? Glorantha, Eastgarth, whatever it is they called it in Bushido. I don't know if they might even have, what did they call it? Nippon, perhaps?
Nippon,
I imagine.
They might be. I don't remember.
And any of these other settings, the ones that I know pretty well, like Glorantha, the ones that I know through reading, Chivalry and Sorcery. Also another one I know pretty well through play, although not as well as some, Tecumel. Others that I just know about a little bit, like Melanda and stuff like that, which I haven't played or don't have. But even the smatterings that I've picked up from those, they all rock. These are not generic fantasy settings. These are places that live and breathe and have clothes and eat, certain ways, and they've got some geography and they've got ideas, and the races are interesting. All of these particular early fantasy settings, they beat the shit out of all the fantasy settings that would ever come after, with a few exceptions. But they really do. I mean, it's you're just looking at it going, shit, man, I want to play in this world now. Now that I sat down, broke my brain, tried not to break the spine of the poor book, which was never meant to be read 40 years after it was published. And I'm like, this was good. So you've got this full spectrum, and I have to say that high fantasy occupies the only place in this whole approach of doing these things of what I just described, which is play a bit and build. Play a bit and build. Enough of a setting was implied here to make you think there might be something, but we don't really care what you do with it, Maybe all the martial arts come from a faraway land, and so, these guys learned this exotic thing that no one else knows. Or maybe this is something you just do, right? And everybody, it's all over the place. I don't know. And then there's more weirdness. Remember I said there was that solo adventure? That solo adventure has none of the nuanced choices in character creation. The character is a warrior healer. So it's basically I can fight and I can heal myself. And the main non-player character in the adventure is a little more interesting. Is an alchemist. By the way, alchemists, they got guns. So, and actually looking at the wizard rules, which aren't lame, but they're pretty generic, I'll play an alchemist any day. That's kind of, I was looking again, I was saying, I kind of like my animal master here, but I'm making up an alchemist next for sure. And so there, but that's all you get. Now, so in this solo adventure I'm talking about, it is cultural as hell. It's fantasy Aztec
Hmm.
with a touch of India thrown in. And it is full. I mean, you got to know the cultural and political background. They warn you before the adventure. They say, read these paragraphs. It matters. Because you go in there in that solo adventure, and if you don't know which god does what, if you don't know, there's no point of playing. The point is to enjoy that stuff that your character is knowledgeable about them and
Hmm.
copes with it in some way. That's part of the point. The people who made that adventure really cared immensely about the grounding of the character in the culture of play and how much fun that was. And then that taps into the funky fantasy technology of the different crystals and how that ties into the religion. And after playing that adventure, you're kind of like, where's my source book? You know, I want the.
Hmm.
Well, how come this wasn't in the core book? You know, how come come on, this was great. Where's this? So, you know, and I was a little surprised. I was like reading this and going, this is solid gold setting I'm looking at here.
And it
And yet,
never
it,
appeared anywhere.
right, it was just for the solo adventure, and that was it. And I think I'll have to look. Maybe in some of the
Hmm.
other adventures, I'll have to look because a lot of them are set in some pretty exotic places too. So, whoever was playing, and the people playing this game, the core book does not reflect the care towards setting that at least some
Hmm.
of the very active practitioners
Yeah.
took. So that's it. That just and there's nothing in the core book about how to do that, like to say and build your setting like this guy.
Hmm.
And it's there. I mean, it's like this big cutout right there in the text. You can almost see. I would see a little paragraph I would write right there saying, and you know where you get after you build out from your dungeon, use what you know, do something
Hmm.
cool with it, like that guy. So high fantasy is a really interesting example, though. Do you see how it's got all these same components we're seeing in these other games,
Hmm.
but it occupies a weird spot in the way that they parse them and how they relate to learning the game and how to play. What are some let's have some more experiences of playing these things. And I know it was ages ago. Herman, dig deep. Dragon Quest us.
Hmm. Yeah, we didn't. There was a bit of the we were also searching because we were trying things out after playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, which was the main course at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Yeah, it felt like a more tactical thing and a more. We never got really into the world. I think we played some adventures and stuff, and it was a bit hard to get going and get into the rules enough to make it feel like your character was doing the right thing,
Right,
was working.
right. Well, it does strike me in reading it anyway that
Hmm.
at any point until very recently, just because I'm feeling this way these days, what with RuneQuest and all, um, it's clear that I would not, for most of my gaming career, be interested in that careful attention to improvement.
Hmm.
The careful, what did I
Right.
do, and how much time did I spend on it, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't have been able to get into that. The
Yeah.
it also strikes me this is more of a historical question for somebody who knows is just how badly was it hit in terms of distribution being carried in terms of the Satanic Panic because in the States because it would have run face first. It is really explicit
Hmm.
about
I've
I mean it is genuinely biblical
Ru-
in its demonic stuff and
Wait,
is
RuneQuest?
no, I'm talking about Dragon Quest.
Dragon Quest.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dragon
Yeah.
Quest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. No. No. No.
RuneQuest had to kind of like cover up its paganness in it kind of had to put clothes on all the statues,
Right.
but
Hmm.
but the but yeah, Dragon Quest was really explicit in its hellfire and its occultism and that kind of stuff. And I just wonder if the distributors, in 1983 or 84, took one look at that and was like, okay, that one's not going to the stores.
That's interesting. I wonder if
I would.
anyone even read the text beyond the monster manual.
Well, you're probably right about that, but it in terms of public reaction, the chance that it's just the statistical chance that any of those activists would have ever run across Dragon Quest in the first place is, infinitesimally small. But the point I'm getting at is distribution. That's why I mentioned distributors. You don't have to scare the public. You have to scare the distributor. The film people have known that forever. That's how you get a film, destroyed, is you scare the distributors about it, and then they just refuse. They just don't, nobody makes the distributor carry anything. There's no free speech law as far as that's concerned. So, that's it. You just scare them and you're done. They're all risk averse anyway.
Right.
And so,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And my memory of how I got my copy of Dragon Quest was it was in the toy department of some department store.
Really?
Some mall department store. Yeah. Actually, I got a lot of D&D and oddball stuff from like that kind of mall department stores in my.
I wonder if that has something to do with a particular staff there, like the person who ordered. Because
we had,
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, we had across from where I lived in the center of town, there was a big, huge bookstore, and the bookstore had one guy who was very into board games, the kind with the little cardboard chits and the classic kind of board games with the hexagons and stuff.
Right.
So they had SPI stuff because SPI was one of the big guys.
Mm-hmm.
So that at some point they had some D&D stuff, but that his main thing was, I guess, was board games.
Right.
So this SPI, so Dragon Quest came along with.
He probably ordered the line.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and I generally found that even in the hobby game stores at the time, so we're talking about early '80s now, in my experience, some few thought of themselves as kind of full spectrum places. Some few of them, I was lucky to have one of those in my area, so that you could go in and see. That's how I was, at least if I didn't buy the game or play it, at least I'd seen it on the rack. When you talk about most of these early role-playing games and associated war games and other publications, I mean, they're not unfamiliar to me in terms of physical reality. But in most other places that I went, it really did depend. And again, sometimes it would be a store that didn't carry games or didn't bill itself as this kind of store, but that one staff member was into a particular role-playing game or a set of them, and just had managed to get a few up onto the shelf, and probably the manager of the store had no idea what they were, what they even were. Let's take a look at at play again. So which one of these games does anybody feel like they really did internalize and see and have it hitched together?
Probably none of them.
Oh no!
I mean, I had these. I mean, I would drag these games home from the game store every now and then and talk about them to my D&D friends, but there was no interest. Like this is just a more complicated way to do D&D. Who gives a shit?
Right.
Was pretty much the attitude of everyone. Now, I did play some Rollmaster in college, and I don't know where that angles in. Because they were advertising like character law.
Right. Actually, I have that in the
very early ages.
Right. Exactly. Actually, I have that in the list. I put up a copy of Arms Law, one of the first editions of Arms Law. And
that's right, you did.
At that moment that I'm talking about, which is sort of I don't know, well, anything really from 1976 through 1980 or 81. At that point, those were still modular, use in your fantasy campaign things. And and I suppose, when you put them all together, and I think they did get collected as a packet first, in a box, perhaps.
Yeah, later on, I think.
A little bit later on.
Yeah, a
But
little bit.
and then being and calling them Rollmaster, I think, began with that first just compilation. For Rollmaster to become its own actual rules text was more like 1985. And when you're in
Right.
1985, you're dealing with an enormous spectrum of role-playing games.
Right.
That's kind of beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
But I played Rollmaster in college too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm trying to remember when I actually started playing, because I was like somewhat, I think 82, 83 or something, in my late teens somewhere, because they weren't that available over here,
Right.
as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So I came across them at that same bookstore which had the board games.
Right.
When I was like, I think I got interested when I was 16 or something like that. So that was 81.
Mm-hmm. So if we say again, Rod?
I was just going to ask if we were sticking on Rollmaster for a little bit, or
well, we could. I mean, if we want to talk about it as a game, as a somewhat later phenomenon, this was after, I think. I mean, most of the games we're talking about were kind of like this first flush of I can do them, and you didn't have to be D&D. We can talk in a minute about how each of them has a curious relationship with D&D. By the time you get to that point, now they say, okay, now how are we going to write this as a game? The D&D-ness, the post, by the mid 80s, just like GURPS Fantasy, you did it that way because that's what it is. You know, when they wrote, the first version of Eastgarth or the Arduin Grimoire, they didn't have that attitude. That attitude was, well, shit, man, that guy in some Midwestern geek did it this way. I'll do it this way, And so, there was no veneration of D&D in the writing of, and that's one thing I see. Even Pedal Throne, which is published by TSR, there's a straight up, stand straight attitude toward this material, which has no truck with having to live up to the standards of anything else. So I think for Rollmaster as a game, that would be sort of my inference. But to go back to like why would you publish Arms Law, Claw Law, etc.? What's going on with that? And much of it has to do with the same thing of why did Melee and Wizard, as little combat games, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with D&D combat scattered through all these games. There's a lot of dissatisfaction. They each one is openly dismissive. That's the other thing. Every one of these games is brutally dismissive toward D&D. Now, they don't use the name because by that time, the Bloom family was lawyering up and going after anybody who mentioned them. But and you can see that they're all like, I mean, and you know what the phrasing that's used throughout most of these that I've been reading lately and remembering? Most other role-playing games, they say. Yeah. And then they describe D&D, and you know what's interesting? D&D is the only one that's like that. None of the other ones that we're looking at have that particular feature that's being criticized. And yet, it's also an uneasy dismissal, because in many cases, I think, the creators felt like they had to play the game. They had to be D&D enough or nobody would play. So that's where you get these uneasy dungeons thrown in, where they really, in case of Chivalry and Sorcery, I mean, they stick out horribly. I mean, you're like, no, I'm not going to go into a dungeon. You just set me up for doing 1,000 interesting things, and going down there is not one of them. And, dragons aren't in dungeons in Chivalry and Sorcery. Dragons are flying around the mountaintops and attacking castles. What are they? What's he doing down there? I'm not going. I want to kill a dragon. I'm staying up here. So the uneasy relationship with dungeons, though, is very clear. Tunnels and Trolls, it's not an uneasy relationship at all, because that's where you go. That's where you play. That's what you do. And you start with such shit. You start with a loincloth, sandals, a sword, and a torch.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, buddy, I hope there's a lot of us, because some of us aren't coming back. um, wizard. We got a wizard, right? Take that, you fiend. You're ready? It's like a little blowtorch finger. Yeah, I'm ready, man. This thing's going off when we need it because we better need it.
Yep.
In the labyrinth is kind of interesting. Its name, of course, in the labyrinth, in and of itself. Why not just call it the fantasy trip, which is hands down like the most awesome possible name for a 70s fantasy game ever, right? Why not just call it the fantasy trip? Nope, we have to call it in the labyrinth so everybody knows what kind of game this is. And it is, I wouldn't say it's a bad fit because in Sidri you can have anything. So of course you can have dungeons too. And they even give you this insanely, well, where are we here? Here we go. I said it was insanely. Well, why would I say something like that? Why would I call it insanely anything? Because that's all 7 levels on one map.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
All 7 levels on one map, superimposed with different cross-hatching for each one.
Wow.
Yeah. I Xeroxed this, and I took out colored pencils, and I took 7 different copies, and I colored each proper level with the right colored pencil so that I would have separate level maps. And I used it. So yes, no one shall lecture me anything about the in the labyrinth game. And yes, there was a labyrinth. So but and again, there's no other context particularly. There's rules for like how much time it takes to make magic items and stuff like that. And there's your job, curiously.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a haphazard relationship with everything, of which dungeon is one of them. I talked about RuneQuest, how they kind of had to make a dedicated D&D town, in order to in one spot of the setting in the Big Rubble. And then in Adventures in High Fantasy, again, it's kind of interesting. You're high fantasy. You basically just it's kind of given that wherever you're going has lots of rooms, and all their examples are not dungeons with levels. They are structures, either ruins or a temple. They're taking much more of that approach that some of the better D&D material of the time took, which is, no, we're not making a dungeon. We're making the Temple of Elemental Evil. That's a lot more interesting than a dungeon, So,
yep.
So they kind of took that approach. And then, what dungeons have to do with Bushido? I have no idea, and I don't know the game as written, so, not experientially.
I don't think it really did dungeons.
Yeah. Dragon Quest has adventures that have lots and lots of tunnels in them. So there's both the adventure in the book, in the core book, and then there's the kind of the canonical campaign. Like the Village of Hamlet. It's kind of the canonical item for BX. And there we go. The Blade of Electus.
Okay.
With a big demon face on it, because this is Dragon Quest and we have demons. Adventure 2.
Yeah.
I think Adventure 1 is the one in the book, perhaps.
I had a copy of, I think, number 3, which was the Enchanted Wood, which had the Jacquet art on it, which was Jacquet wrote it. It was Timothy Truman art, which was amazing if you ever want to pick that up.
Yes.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean,
unbelievable.
I actually found a lot of Tim Truman art for gaming in all of my rummaging through the earlier games. And of course, you're talking to a Grimjack veteran here. So, But this is, this is familiar material to all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what you do. So, Dragon Quest basically just embraces it and says, we're doing adventures, and the adventures are going to have catacombs and tunnels, and we're doing it.
They do seem to be at least kind of naturalistic looking towers and keeps,
yeah,
as opposed to
they
just
have
agreed. Fill this piece of graphic
Yeah.
verse.
That is very true, and in fact, the Blade of Electus has a lot of exterior shots as well.
Okay, yeah.
So you get a look at the battlements and stuff like that.
That's such a good idea. Actually.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
and the and it's the catacombs are interesting. They've got multiple entrances and exits for multiple things. It's very much supposed to be, you don't start in one end and come out the other. You kind of are at the island. So there's some very other kind of tricky relations. Tecumel, of course. Now, I would not say, I don't know whether Tecumel acquired its extensive catacomb system because it was being published by TSR, or whether in the years, of play and development before that event, whether that had already been an important part of things. We'll never know, I imagine. Maybe somebody knows, but maybe that's been lost or obscured. In terms of that relationship to D&D, I think I just covered most of them in terms of procedure, particularly the dismissive nature toward magic. None of them has fire and forget magic. None of them have, many of them, the Fantasy Trip and Tunnels and Trolls, RuneQuest, certainly Mana in High Fantasy, a lot of them are body energy powered. You damage yourself in fatigue or in some resource like power in RuneQuest. But you got a battery and you use up the battery. Yeah. That's a big deal in almost all of them. This dismissiveness comes up in another way, which is an interesting reversal. And I'm sure I'm talking to two people who know this profoundly. In the text to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, 1979. And there's a lot on economics. There's that section on silver pieces, and there's that whole section on what would happen to the inflation of the area by this influx of treasure, largely saying jack up the cost of the equipment now, thank you very much. Don't get that invisible hand in there, man. Don't let them buy that broadsword, for the on the cheap now that they've got $1 zillion. So, stuff like that. And there's a lot about the different names of the different social levels of, kind of culled from periods of medieval Europe, and a variety of other things. There's a section on ships. There's a section on this, on that, and how much hirelings cost, and all this kind of stuff. In there is a polemic, an angry one, because 1979 Gygax's writing is kind of cranky. If you read the Dragon editorials and stuff like that, it's like, and so this one is cranky about birth tables, about social class as part of character creation, and it is vituperative. He said it would be foolish to blindly plug in a set of, scare quote, birth tables. And oddly enough, I'm looking at every Dungeons and Dragons character I made up in that very year, and if there was one thing on this earth that I desperately needed, it would have been a birth table to roll upon, or at least even to look at and choose in the beginning in character creation. It's the one thing that was desperately needed to actually make this damn thing a fantasy setting. And all these other, not all the other games, Tunnels and Trolls doesn't give a shit, but most of these other games do. And you can kind of see what he's striking out about when you're looking at, these games surrounding you, like popping up in front of you with these, with these, in many cases, rather well thought out, social constructs for everybody to be in.
Yep.
You kind of say, wow, stung a little bit, by other people doing this well. Is that what I'm looking at here? And I think it's more nuanced than that even. Because when Gary Gygax did get the opportunity, or was forced into, if you want to look at it that way, writing a fantasy role-playing game from the ground up, which is Dangerous Journeys, the first one. Legendary Adventures is 90s. But when he writes Dangerous Journeys, you get, now I have the Prime version, which is sort of the slimmed down version. But the important thing about it is that you get points to spend on your attributes. It's a point build. I'm given to understand that the big thick one has more dice in it, but it's a point build. And the one single thing you roll, and it's the first thing you do in character creation, is, you guessed it, social rank.
Social rank, yep.
And it's huge. I mean, social rank then sets up 10,000 other things. That is the door you walk through to start even beginning to think about your character. And the ancient world that he does, which is a fantasy ancient world where a great deal of the Sahara is an inland sea. And so therefore, Egypt is actually even more of, a maritime empire,
Right.
And so the Mediterranean is there, but also there's this massive African sea. And the game is wonderfully multicultural and uses Egyptian terminology and stuff to set up, and concepts to set up the magic, and has these wonderful African and Arab wizards in the illustrations and stuff like that. And you're going, I don't want to do the psychology here, but yes, maybe blindly plugging in some birth tables was a really, really good idea. And maybe you knew it, or at least came to know it, or maybe knew it at the time, but you had to defend the D&D. I don't know. But it's clearly a piece of how people played. That is, the people making these games were class conscious. They were social rank conscious in some way. They cared and knew it mattered to a fictional phenomenon that your character had this kind of role, unless, like Tunnels and Trolls, and to some extent in Labyrinth, you were very knowledgeably self-referential. That D&D was obviously the sticky outy one here. We had a setting. I mean, Gygax, as the author of Greyhawk, could not possibly have been, dismissive of social rank as an important feature of your character concept. So again, more information slightly lost or obscured to the ages that I think probably we're not going to be able to parse. But yes, other thoughts, particularly?
None right now.
We also haven't talked much about the differences in combat. Skirmish, hex-based or maneuver-based skirmish combat's huge for Dragon Quest, and it is everything in the Labyrinth. I mean, it is those hexes are key. You got to have them. And for Tunnels and Trolls, it's abstracted as hell. Never mind your 1-minute combat round that everybody was talking about in D&D. No, these are 5-minute combat rounds. And it is a group roll. Everybody rolls into the total. And you compare it to the monster total. And you take the difference. The loser splits the difference across all the characters, and that's the damage.
Yep.
And then you make that more nuanced by having individual actions when a character subtracts themselves out of that roll, so that they aren't contributing to surviving the monster attack, but they're trying to do a thing. They're trying to do one thing. And that one thing is usually an end run of some kind, depending on the situation. But that's pretty abstracted. I mean, it is really, you don't even care who hit who. You can narrate it if you want to, but if you want that nuance, then, get yourself out of the group role and do something interesting to find out what happens to you particularly. But, you're not you're not caring. Everything about I skip behind him, and get in a good
Yeah.
blow or something like that. If you happen to have rolled really, really well into the group roll, nothing stops anybody from narrating that, oh, you must have cut the guy's head off, or something like that. But it's
Yeah,
not
there's
part. It's
nothing in
yeah,
the book or the rules about that.
yeah, and there isn't, and not only that, but there's no causality to that.
No.
It would all be post-roll narration of saying, just deciding that your high roll into the group deserves a little coloring up.
Mhm.
So you've got that over there in Tunnels and Trolls, and yet over in in the fantasy trip or in the labyrinth, I mean, if you can somehow flank the guy for that +2, it's so important. If the rules for all the rules in all the rules that you see in third and fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons about
Mhm.
closing and getting out, striking and getting a shifting out and
Mhm.
stuff like that, all of that comes straight out of the fantasy trip. It is raw melee hex map skirmish rules. It's all the same. I mean, you're reading it and you're like, oh, I
Do
know
you,
these rules.
do you happen to know how much of the GURPS combat rules are
The GURPS combat rules are
direct?
very, very, very similar.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of the in fact, I would say from the fantasy trip to GURPS, that may actually be the single most ported
Right.
item.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And Champions, of course, lifted all that from Melee or lifted it from Melee and Wizard. Um,
Oh.
so
Mhm.
all their things about 3 hexes away, -1, 6, that kind of thing, all that's taken from
Oh,
there.
okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's a huge trajectory of it's a huge family of role playing design based on that. Okay, you've got your 3 front hexes, you got your 2 side hexes, you got your
Mm-hmm.
rear hex, you got your movement allowance. How does the option for movement and when you do it relate to whether it's a charge attack or you're allowed 1 shift as a move action, which should sound
Mhm.
familiar. It's any number of latter day
Oh,
D&D
wow.
players. All that stuff is all from there. So
Yeah.
so there's that whole thing. And also, those are the ones, most of these, no, we should go to this. Most of them have soak for armor. RuneQuest, Tunnels and
Right.
Trolls,
Yes.
and in the Labyrinth, you hit and then you subtract this amount from the damage, and then that's the damage you
Mhm.
take. So that's one thing. But not all of them. High Fantasy actually has a really interesting system. It's abstracted to a number of points, and they come from your innate ability to basically dodge or avoid harm. So this isn't about their roll to hit. Okay,
Mhm.
there is a difference of their roll to hit. You subtract your defense from their offense, and then that's their percent to hit. But then there's a feature which is how much damage you probably aren't going to take because of who you are. And then there's your armor.
Mm.
And the armor gets ablated as you go.
Okay.
Okay.
And so more so than RuneQuest armor is kind of ablative, but not very much. The other games have options for that. Like in the Labyrinth, there's rules for how your armor gets dinged down, but you don't have to. I mean, they pretty much openly say, yeah, this is kind of for the crazy ones, the people who really care about this. Um, but you'll notice that most of them don't. I mean, even Tunnels and Trolls talks about your armor getting ripped up over time.
Mhm.
Um, it is it is kind of interesting. I mean, that none of them have none of them have the same combat system. You know, they all basically they all basically get combat to be a little more frightening, a little bit more in the moment. Even Tunnels and Trolls is a little more frightening in the moment, as we discovered, because you really do have to trade off with, are we all going to throw in against these monsters to
Mhm.
get to rack up that total so we don't
Yeah.
take damage? Or are we going to risk a couple of you with high attributes making your saving rolls, which is the attribute roll, they call it the saving roll in Tunnels and Trolls, to do something we need done? Because if you can do that, if you can hamstring them,
Mhm.
or if you can go grab the gem or something, we're good. But that
Yeah.
means that our total's going to be lower, and we
Right.
gotta suck
Yeah.
that up. If we lose, then that means all the more damage that all of us are going to take. So there's a little bit of a nosebleed going on there. And then in something like in RuneQuest or in the Labyrinth, who's
Mhm.
fastest? Who's going to get in that first blow? Who's going to move where? Who is currently knocked prone? Right on it, and you're looking
Yeah.
back and forth and saying, all right, what are we going to do this round? What are we going to do this round? Because this
Mhm.
is the situation in this very second.
Right.
Roll. We got to think about this. Okay, we're going in order of decks. Am I going to drop behind you in the order so that maybe you can get this done, so then I can come in? Stuff like that is all
Yeah.
really pretty pretty engaging. You know,
Mhm.
and so I know that in Dragon Quest, maneuverability is enormous. If you can get behind the guy with your movement, you're going to
Mhm.
way better than going toe to
Yeah.
toe. I played a lot of Rollmaster, and you know what? This is actually going to be I can't believe this is true. My memory of Rollmaster had very little maneuverability going on in it whatsoever.
Did
Do
you say
you
very little
very little
movement
like
and maneuver?
maneuverability, like how many steps I take over here, and I can't. Do we play it on squares or not for the battles and stuff? I seem to recall we did.
Yeah, we definitely didn't do it on a map. We
Yeah,
were
we didn't
just like,
either. Which is weird because that game is very,
because it's very
very nuanced in all these things that you would think that it would be
Mhm.
very skirmishy, but I don't recall it being so at all. And I mean, come on, when it starts off with nuanced combat supplements like arms law versus claw law,
right.
versus, all these things, you'd think it would be.
Well, right. Well, my impression of what we were doing was that always like the critical hit table for the reason we were, you know,
That's right. Right.
picking Rollmaster as opposed to something else.
Well, that's
So
true. So maybe maybe
maneuver,
it's there in
who
the rules.
cares?
I've got the rule book downstairs, of the first edition Rollmaster as such, but I don't. I'll have to go back and see whether we just skipped that when we
Yeah,
played it.
skipped it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was not the
I would know.
yeah.
So.
I was not the game master. So
Mhm.
and then also for combat, death. You know what the tunnels and trolls, of course, characters are potato chips until
Right.
they're not.
Mhm.
But they didn't even, you could buy a pack of character sheets, but the rule book doesn't mention them. You're supposed to use 3x5 cards. Why?
Right.
so, so
Yeah.
you can throw it over your shoulder, But but some of the others, they they're sort of infamous, these games, for being pretty lethal. And
Right.
that strikes me as
Mhm.
kind of there's a difficult fit between the cultural nuances of the characters and the sort of sense of identity for a lot of the characters. There's a lot of tension between that and getting hit with a critical through the chest with a spear.
Yeah, I
There's a
remember that being
Mhm.
something that ground my gears a lot
yeah,
during games. We were playing in the '90s and stuff like that, or even in stuff like Call of Cthulhu, where it's like it's fun, you're gonna die. I was like, I don't know. It took me a long time to make this dude. I don't know if I actually want to
right,
die.
right. I mean, there's that, and I also especially when improvement matters that much, when you care
Right.
about improvement. So each character actually has a pretty good history. I don't want to say yet.
Mhm.
My latter day play of RuneQuest, as is evident in the comments, we seem not to have killed any of us. And I don't think it's because I've been taking it very easy. There's been a couple of very demonstrably lucky rolls here and there. Or not necessarily lucky rolls, but it just so happens not to quite go over what it needed to go over. So I can't say yet. We haven't lost a beloved character. So I can't say, oh, well,
Mhm.
these games you lose beloved characters all the time because, you know, Resurrection is big in RuneQuest. Resurrection is also big in Petal Throne. In some of the others that I have, it's there, but it's obviously there as kind of a because it has to be their way. Um, but yeah, I mean, you got to have heavy healing and you got to have resurrection if you're going to have that kind of lethality. Just seems, massive tissue trauma and then bounce back up because you're healed. That seems to be a way to do it. But it wasn't until Champions. Now, it might not have been the first game to do it, but it was the first game I encountered to do it, where you had stun. I mean, in a way that mattered, where that was the primary damage. Other games before that had ways to like get exhausted and fall over, like the encumbrance rules or fatigue rules. But really getting tired during the fight and having that affect you more than your dedicated tissue trauma, that didn't really seem to be very important in those games that I had any experience with. In the Labyrinth had some really like mind-numbing fatigue rules in the advanced melee that we never used. But yeah, in Champions, then all of a sudden it was about how much you were sucking wind and how much you were stunned. How many stars you were seeing, and much more so than whether your entrails were hanging out. So,
which of course also sort of fits better with the superhero
absolutely, yeah,
comics,
absolutely.
and
it also was a very bad fit when they tried to make the hero system cover all kinds of damages and stuff like that. Because if you could do that kind of damage with a gun, then why didn't? Then all of a sudden, why would you play supers? Why didn't And so anyway, that the hero system has kind of like fought that all through its history ever since it went to be the hero system. So, but back to these fantasy ones, it then leads us to that interesting point. What are we here to do? What is the character here to do? In RuneQuest, if you live, you become a legend. You are on the path, or you could well be on the path to the hero wars, to being, a Heracles, to being an Odysseus, to being a, even becoming, literally, you could be Dionysus. You become a god, right?
Which in my memory then was never
not in RuneQuest. No,
not
in RuneQuest
back in the days, not
right. In RuneQuest, they never did manage to spit it out. They kept talking about it.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
But they never could. But they at that level. But hey, if you became a rune lord, that was pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, that was cool.
There's
or
compared
to
to
or whatever.
Getting rune status was no small thing, and basically you were in a completely different rules cycle of play as well. It really was a mechanics jump. And some of the others though, I mean, that's one thing that really gripes me about Petal Throne, unless somebody can correct me, or maybe in the myriad texts available, or and it really gripes me about Eastgarth, which is a game I mention a lot that no one else knows. But
I've never heard of it before today.
It actually it has a pedigree. The guy really busted out multiple versions of it over 15 years, and the version I have, I mean, it is baked in play. I mean, it is baked. You say, you know what, I could play this. You have covered this shit, man. You have played this through thick and thin.
I think I saw the adverts for it back in the day, but never could get a copy over here.
But what gripes me is that what do you do once you have like manned up a bit or womaned up a bit, so that now you can hurl the spell, and now you are, you're weighty. You can walk into a fight. You can walk into a situation. You got skills this way. It's got great social rules. So your reputation, and I think Bushido may have been the groundbreaker in that one. But either Eastgarth did it itself or it picked it up. But your ability in Chivalry and Sorcery has its influence rules and its very powerful social rank situation. So you've got mechanics you've got weight. You influence judicial decisions. People come to you for problems. You have a number that lets you know things about how people look at you and all that stuff. But aside from that, it doesn't talk much about what then. Was it just that all these people were playing a war game at the same time? So you say, well, now I'm the general, and you just knew, right? Because a lot of these games were
Right.
built to be, or the ideal was that you would be playing the war game campaign at
Right.
the same time. Do you just know?
Mm.
Um, but what about all the cool magic? I mean, what happens when you're basically, buddies with the Duke of Hell? What happens when I mean, how does this play into the culture? How does this play into the only Glorantha really
Mhm.
manages to talk about that as somewhat sketchily as it did. You started to see material like Dora Store. You started to see material like the heavy implications in Cults of Terror. That there is a great game afoot here, and that you're gonna care. You're gonna
Yeah.
be what you do is gonna matter for these people. What you're gonna do is going to create myth. Um, that's pretty strong in the Glorantha material,
Mhm.
but there's not much rules for it, like you say. But in the other games, I mean, if there ever was a game that was just crying out for what do you do when you get up there in the temple hierarchy, it's the Empire of the Petal Throne.
Mm.
It's just dying for it. Again, if somebody knows, then please tell me because I want to know what happens. But in the others, yeah, it's awful sparse.
Mm.
There's nothing. I mean, Tunnels and Trolls in Labyrinth, they don't care. You're powerful now. Okay, here's a
Yep.
bigger foe. But in the others, how it's not in Dragon Quest.
Nope.
No,
Not
it's
not
not.
at least not in the.
Yeah, and it's not in high fantasy. Um, it's kind of like all of them say, okay, well, now that we've given you ways to level up or group or bust up,
Mhm.
that's all you need. And I'm kind of going, well, not if we go with some of these implied coolnesses that you've got, either
Mhm.
implied in Dragon Quest with the magic or implied in the at least the adventure material for high fantasy, explicit in these settings with these awesome histories like, you know, I again, I'm so jealous about Bushido. I'm like itching to know, what they had in there for cultural context for these conflicts and stuff like that. Did it have like a fantasy world? I know it's really like almost literally set in medieval Japan with the
Yeah.
shugenzas, with the traditional magic. But does it have like any fantasy setting history stuck in there?
Don't really think so.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's been ages. I should dig up the book again and take a look because.
Yeah. But that's the thing that I just find painfully missing is what
Mhm.
does the epic or at least very, very socially advanced character do? Chivalry and sorcery, I'm under the impression that you actually can like get your own castle. That you can become like a player and have your fief and probably have to manage all the money and stuff like that, given that game. But even that, it's I want to know what happens when your character gets magically important, and the game's maybe I'm asking too much. How many years was each one of these played prior to publication? I mean, we're measuring that stuff in months,
Yeah,
you
probably.
know, and so I might be asking a little too much to say, well, what happens if we play for 5 years? And they're like, dude, 5 years is 3 years down the road. Why are you asking me? you know,
Mhm.
so I can see that, but anyway, so I just want to kind of get across that there was a renaissance of fantasy role playing before everyone said D&D is the way to do it,
That's interesting.
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the range of options and the attention to certain things. the different kinds of magic. We didn't really even get to contrast that particularly, but the different kinds of magic and the philosophical underpinnings of each one. I would love to see some Eastgarth, some Bushido, and some, the game I never heard of, Malanda. It would be really wonderful to see some of these things played. Playing a session's not good enough. Not for these games. They're not built for session play. They're built for
longer term stuff.
Yeah, in it to win it basically. And so so that it's kind of, I think that's one of the stopping points is, do I really want to dedicate, the next year, to playing Eastgarth? Well, maybe I would, but to find 4 other people,
right?
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, it's so you're not entirely certain. I mean, and yeah, we could play an adventure and then see, but I'd be the one who'd like have chosen, the location. I'd be the one who had like done like the back reading and brought in all this stuff.
Right.
I'd be like, I just gave myself a master's in Eastgarth, you fuckers owe me. So,
it's not for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, get your ass back here, fight the lizard man, or else, that guy's got like 3 feathers in his headdress. Do you know what that means?
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah. But if it were, I mean, what would be your pick? I mean, not to well, no, to GM or to play, because I think my picks would be a little different for each of those.
Yeah, I think from those older games, I'd still probably go with RuneQuest or something, because it's in my memory the most coherent one and the most.
It certainly has rewarded me in the last 3-4 months. I just posted the final session, as a matter of fact, and I'm not going to. That game, I mean, we still have to kind of probably have a group get together to bitch, right? About the things that we really look at and we're like, really? But the bones of the game are incredibly solid. I mean, you can definitely see why somebody would say, well, if we tweak this and that, we tweak that, this is going to really fly. Yeah. And I think it flies already. There's the one that we forgot to mention that I've failed to mention this whole time. Arduin Grimoire.
I know the name, but not more than that.
It's usually thought of, someone's going to correct me, of course, when I say this. My understanding is that its rules are basically Dungeons and Dragons. But I think that he jumps off a cliff, right? Dave Arduin from in the UK just goes nuts. It's notable for being like the most uncompromising, psychedelic, violent, excessive thing around. And why I don't have a copy, I do not know. Why I have not played the shit out of it, I do not know. But of all these games, if you're talking about the one that if I had the opportunity to just, learn it, DM it, play it as written, probably have to tweak this or that, not as written in order to keep from blowing our brains out and whatever, do that. That would probably be my top choice. And I'd be starting from 0, because even though I'm familiar with it through reference for 40 years, because I heard of it back then, I have yet to pick up a copy and actually read and internalize. I want the book, I mean, for these older games, I
know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And I'm over at Gen Con, and I'm saying, I got to go find an Arduin. Does somebody have one? So yeah, I think I just resolved. I'm going to go get those, and then I'm going to start organizing. And I suppose it's probably pretty obvious that the one I'd like to play in or GM is Eastgarth as well. Those are the ones that I think would be of the ones that I haven't played. I'd certainly play in Bushido, because I remember reading a very unsympathetic review of Bushido back in 1980, and yet that's a game that has remained loved by a tiny a tiny group, a tiny culture all the way through gaming. And today, bad review in 1980 or not, today if somebody says I played it, I'm like, ooh, that's a badge. You've got you've got the badge. So that'd be one of them. But what about you, Rod?
Well, playing or running Dragon Quest would sort of fulfill this childhood nostalgia alert. Like, what could have been?
Right.
I finally find out.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say that the horoscope steps suddenly sort of gave me a charge.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I mean, the whole thing about like, if there's something I really want to do, maybe midnight on September 30th.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's something I really want to. Guys, we got to do this. Yeah, but the stars aren't right.
Right. Yeah, that's a neat feature. Of course, if someone draws the death aspect, then that's kind of horrifying. Like
but that was the thing. They were non-trivial.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed.
Big swing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I'm also sort of fascinated by chivalry and sorcery, just because the whole.
Someone else has got to do that, man.
Right.
I'll do it. I mean, I'll play that thing. But yeah,
I'll take I think I bought the PDF from Drive-Thru. I'll take a look at it. But I do remember it was extremely intimidating, but also the whole thing of actually getting in with this medieval society stuff in a way that's not just like boilerplate. Like, I guess there's a castle over there.
Yeah. The Lord summons you, and it's like, okay, you look like a guy from Disney, and I feel like I'm in a Disney court. So, yeah, there's that. Also, I was surprised myself at working my way through it. I stalled out a little bit because along the same lines, it sort of right in the middle of character creation, right when you're about ready to like go and get your skills, it suddenly starts blithering about fiefs. And you're like, oh, now I'm confused. What do I do? And so then you go over to the skills, and of course it carefully explains what each skill is. And you're like, but how do I get it?
Right.
I'm sure it's in there maybe, or maybe it's an assumption that you're supposed to just get, but I don't know. Maybe here, what does it say here? It says, no, there must be a way. There must be a way. But the point is that if, aside from that, what I was trying to say was that character creation was so easy and no fault. You just keep rolling.
Right.
And when you're done, you're like, okay, I guess this character is important in our saga now.
Right.
And I kind of liked. It was easier than I thought, and if that was easier than I thought, maybe the rest is too. That's what I'm saying. Maybe the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll look at the materials and let you know.
Yeah, because that was. There's also a game called Mage, and it had its own. It had a supplement or a companion called Demon. And I don't know anything about it. It was another one that
Demon sounds familiar, but
yeah,
something like from an ad in Dragon magazine
right
caught my eye, but nothing I've ever actually seen.
Any thoughts on either the changes in the experience of role playing, or the nature of what it meant to publish, or the nature of fantasy as a role playing experience? Any thoughts on that? I mean,
well, I do notice. I mean, like I was saying about the thing that was interesting me about chivalry and sorcery, grounding in actual swordsmanship. But I mean, this is just another thing that keeps coming back when we're talking about D&D being cut loose from original historic source material, from original fantasy source material, and just sort of eating its own tail. Apparently an inexhaustible topic.
Well, yeah, although I mean I am sympathetic to what I think of as the honest influences on D&D in its early phase. because everybody was involved, did read all that stuff and was just as much of a fantasy and myth nut and history nut as anyone else. And it just somehow, the fact, I just wonder if it was cursed by becoming the name.
The name, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it snowballed into this tournament and convention activity that meant that like good content was catch as catch can. And then it had to become self-referential. You played it this way because D&D fantasy is this way, and you know, but I definitely see that as a stepwise process.
Yeah,
and
it's also
these games,
have their own influences still from other source material from before.
Yeah, I mean,
fantasy from the
I mean,
70s,
it feels like
and stuff.
Yeah.
And if you see at some point D&D becomes the source of novels based on
yes, that effect
game,
occurs actually as early as 81. But before that, you know, it's clear that somebody was doing this fantasy role-playing thing, saw that it was becoming big, was doing it, and said, you know what, I care. I fucking care. And I love medieval Japan. And I'm looking around, and you guys don't, there's not a shred of medieval Japan in this stuff. And I'm doing it. And another person, you know, says, my fantasy world, you know. I mean, the hubris, the hubris of saying, and now we shall present Glorantha. And now, or any of the other ones that we're talking about that are these fantasy settings, that are dedicated fantasy settings, that are surprisingly rock solid. I mean, hubris, look at the Empire of the Petal Throne. I mean, it is the most freaking literate thing imaginable. It is so damned educated. It is the script. The guy, he's a scholar in Arabic and Persian, and he invents his alphabet. He doesn't just lift Arabic; he invents his alphabet. And
I tried to do that myself. Like after reading that book and do this.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just a quirk, because if it were just a quirk because he happened to be an expert in it and the rest were just a bunch of generic stuff, that would be one thing. That would just be bringing some expertise to a detail. No, that is emblematic of the power of this setting. At that point, you know, you're looking at people who seize upon this new medium of tabletop role playing, and they bring it. I mean, they bring force of personality, force of creativity, social backing. You know, Stafford was one of, you know, a dozen people who were, you know, inspired. You know, Barker had his crew of, you know, fellow creators and participants, you know, participants who were into this with him. And they said, no, we're putting it down. We're going to, and the fact that it was put down as a manual for this activity.
Right. And I think that crew is really important, because how many people like me made amazing fantasy settings that my players didn't care about?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, they probably wasn't that great, but definitely.
Yeah.
I was always obsessed on, like, do you guys want to learn my fantasy language? No.
No.
You know that.
I will perhaps ease the pain by saying I today at this time weep tears for that. You know.
Thank you.
Yes. Every one of these beautifully dedicated settings has a deliberately incomplete map. And Barker and Stafford are completely on record and stuck by it the entire time, against the fan base, saying, no, I will not map the freaking world for you. No, I will not tell you what culture lives over those mountains.
Yeah.
And they're like, you're withholding it from us. Like, no, I'm not withholding it from you. You're supposed to be doing this shit with me, you know? And But isn't that like wonderfully honest and self-aware about the nature of
Mhm.
this creative thing we're doing, both as literature, if you want to look at it that way,
Mhm.
because that's how the fantasy authors did it too, by doing
Right.
it, right?
Yep.
And
Right.
they knew that, and they put it into practice as well. So even these
Right.
settings that I'm saying are so awe-inspiring, it's not because they're complete. It's not because they're finished. It's not because I can go anywhere and know what's there. The opposite is the case.
Mhm.
You know, it's actually really I'm blown away. I just, whether it's stylistic, and I give credit for Tunnels and Trolls for winning on style. I mean, it is just so sprightly and so freaking playable and so ready to
Mhm.
go. Even the ones that don't have that kind of awe-inspiring visionary fantasy thing going, when it comes to raw, down and dirty, we're here to do it,
Mhm.
they have it. They completely have it. The energy. I only saw it again in the Heartbreakers.
Mhm.
I'm not going to like disrespect a lot of the other creative work in fantasy
Mhm.
that's been done since then, and some of it was very, very heartfelt. But there is a freshness to these, and a lot of things to acknowledge that may have been considered groundbreaking 25 years later because people didn't know that they had been done, you know,
Mhm.
in that first wave, and not and given like the OSR and everything and all this really strict attention to even printing differences between different pamphlets of the D&D, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
sequence. I look at these and I'm saying, well, you know, there is no reason for these games not to get the same play-based attention and scholarly look to their precise histories. There's no reason not to know this.
Mhm.
In fact, there may be a very good reason to know it in terms of truly understanding insight into raw play-based game design. You know, because these guys, you can tell every one of these games is built through play.
Yeah.
So anyway, kind of where I'm at. I really would. That's why I'm saying let's play. Let's get some of this played. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining me tonight. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you
We'll see who
Good to
else.
see you
chatting
again.
and
Yeah.
for it was fun.
All right, guys. Good night.
All right.
Okay.
I'll
Take
see
care.
you later.
Okay. Bye bye.